Trev and welcome to my blog. I'm finally back. So what have I been up to? Well, I've only been shooting lots of video for you guys. So there's at least 6 good videos coming up for you to watch, all on the old panel beating and paint spraying, and you know, you're gonna love it. You're gonna absolutely wet your pants. So what's all this about? This is my first collaborative project with a guy called Chris Cayley, who runs a company called Outline Displays. Thanks, Chris. Wonderful vintage neon sign. Full-length feature episode coming up on this, how I made it from start to finish. But at least the next 6 episodes will mostly feature card bodywork, but going to involve the sign, because the sign is made out exactly the same materials as a car would be if you were repairing it. So the same steel, the same fillers, same primers and the same paints. So that's why I've done it, you see. So I've got plenty of good stuff for you guys to watch. Hope you enjoy the video. In the last video I showed how I used my old Bedford binnacle as corners for the sign. The whole point of the video is to show how to weld up unwanted holes. Really started to pay attention to the profile of the panel now, and I've sharpened out when I want to make my cut. You'll see that the cut comes in far more around here. The main reason I've done that is because if you look at the edge of this panel, we really have got a very sharp right angle, and the panel is a very definite sort of flat across the top. If I turn it around to the other side, we can see that the angle is far less severe, far less sharp. It's very, very curved, and what it seems to do is it drops off gradually into the flat on the top. It's quite hard to see it on the camera, but it does actually sort of dive off gradually here. So what I've done is I've brought the line all the way back to there, because I know that that's going to be on the same flat level as the other side. So to cut this out, there's a few different tools I use. I could use a reciprocating air hacksaw, or I could use a cut-off disc. So this is a 3" by 1mm disc on here. I could use that to cut it out, just roughing it out of course. Or I could use a pair of aviation snips. Now the thing with aviation snips is they work fantastically well, but you've got to be a little bit careful when you're using these. You don't want to end up twisting your work, deforming the edge that you're cutting. You'll notice that when you're using your snips, the piece that's removed will often curl up. If you've got the snips that turn the other way around, then your work will try and curl up on the edge. So you just want to make sure that you've got the snips around the right way. I'm going to use this 20mm belt sander to cut right up to the Sharpie line. It's got a 60 grit belt on. I also use this 10mm belt sander sometimes for more intricate work. So that's more or less cut out now. What I often do is I put a radius on the corners. I do that if it's not a particularly brilliant fit, the panel, and what that tends to do is it stops the inaccuracies from getting worse as you go out into that point. Also, I notice that you get a lot of heat concentration on the point as opposed to a radius. So that's the reason I do that. 2 reasons I give you there. I've noticed as well that there's a lot of pressing marks in the back of this panel. So if I flip it over, you'll be able to see, or you can probably see there already in the sides, it's extremely uneven, and it actually looks better on the camera, I must admit, than it does in the flesh, but that's extremely uneven, and I'm going to really struggle to get that to marry up against a completely flat panel and not have some kind of joint line afterwards. So what I might do is I might just dolly that round now and try and get that a bit flatter, but I'm still going to struggle whatever happens. Getting down to the nitty gritty now. I really need to summon up the courage and start cutting into this. The actual curved section changes shape radically about here, so I'm thinking about taking it back to around about there cutting that off. We don't need to fit that section because there isn't going to be a benefit to it, is there? And that will save us welding all the way up there, across there, up there, which will save a lot of work, a lot of heat distortion for not much benefit if we did fit it. So that's the plan. So what I'm going to do is cut this off first. So shorten this. I probably welded that hole up wherever it was along there. I probably welded that up needlessly, but that's how these sort of projects go, isn't it? So what I'll probably do is cut that, and then I can align this up by just line it over the top, and I'll cut a piece up to that line out, because every time I cut something out I run the risk of cutting too much out. That will be a disaster. So I'm going to just cut to that line out. So I'll remove a section from there, then I can start overlaying this and using this as the template. The real point of what I'm showing you here is how I get the panel, or the repair panel, the repair patch, whatever you want to call it, to fit as well as I possibly can. There of course will be many other ways other people will approach the job, and this isn't to say that this method's any better than theirs, but it's just the way I do it myself. So what I've done is I've cut as much as I possibly can out of the box. So this box, I've trimmed it back as far as I can so that the repair panel, so this would be a repair panel, whatever you want to call it, this fits as well as it possibly can when you overlay it on top of this. What I've done is I've probably got it just to within a few millimeters, or a couple of millimeters. Actually here you can just see a gap opening up, so I nearly went too far there. What I do, if you can get your head around this, this will really help. So this is how I've worked it out, and I've worked this out through trial and error, lots and lots of error, I can assure you of that. So that may bring you some comfort. If you mark this, so you're going to basically use this piece as a template. So you're going to mark round and leave a nice mark on the panel underneath. Now the problem with this is, if you just do that all in one go, what will happen is you will end up invariably with a gap somewhere. So if you're wondering why you keep getting a gap, I'll try and explain it as best I can and as briefly as I can. The material is around 1 millimeter thick, so it's about 0.9 millimeters if you want to be a bit more precise. And the problem is, you've got to realise that when you mark out, it's going to move when it drops down into position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this side first, and then I'll get this to fit flush here. The reason I'll do that is, if I mark the top around, so if I marked all the way around there, and all the way down there, and then I cut all the way around, what's going to happen is, as soon as I line this up here, because this will be the first place I'll line it at, I'll line that so that's butted up, so that's dead level. It means that the whole panel will shift that way by 0.9 millimeters. So if I've scribed a line and cut it dead to the line, it will mean that it can't move those 0.9 millimeters to close that gap up, and I won't be able to get this flush. So that'll be the first thing I'll do, is just literally scribe down here, cut down here, that'll move over that way. That means that this now will be in the correct place for me to then scribe that around, cut that out afterwards, and then get that to fit. That will mean that it will fit flush all the way around. So if you ever had the issue where you've scribed it all the way around and then it hasn't fitted very well, it's probably for this reason. I'll just get my Sharpie or a marker pen. I've polished this up previously with the surface conditioning discs, so it's nice and flat. And I'll just mark around there like that. Allow that pen to just dry off. Grip the panel back into place now, taking real care to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. I've made this cut, that fits nicely there. As I said, when this drops in flush, so that'll drop in flush like that, if I line this top up flush, this drops down. Okay, so that drops down, this is now too tight, if you see what I'm doing. So I've made that line. Incidentally, I thought I'd just say, always try and do everything at a right angle to the plane that you're doing it on. So if that's your flat, I appreciate that. If you're doing something that's curved all the way around, it's gonna be a lot different from this. But if it's quite flat there, then do that as a right angle, because when you drop it down, it's gonna stay parallel. If I'd drawn this at an angle, dropped it down, I could have ended up with a wider gap or a tighter gap. You see what I'm saying? So drop that down. So I drop that down so the top is flush. What that means now, of course, is the gap that we had here, which was perfect a second ago, is now overlapping. So all I've got to do now is Sharpie that up. Just get a bit of scrap like this, just cut that edge off because that's a razor sharp edge. All I'm going to do is cut some squares out of this to help grip up the flush side now. So I'll just cut some squares out, that's absolutely fine. I'll hammer those out flat so they're completely flat again. You can get grips that have got flat sections that swivel, and they're quite good actually for doing this job. I have found, I mean I haven't got any myself, but I have found that if you're trying to grip up something that's a little bit curved, you can end up in a situation where those little swivelly bits put a high spot in your panel and I always do this. So I just cut a couple of strips of that, and I just put that one from behind like that. Because they're so thin, they sort of compensate for any inaccuracies in the panel or whatever, and they sort of bend rather than the panel bending. They kind of compensate a little bit. So this is a real fiddle, so what I'll probably do is just trap that like that, and then I'll get this and I'll try and slide that in between. Probably end up dropping a lot in a second. There we go. Like a true expert, eh? And so I can now kind of grip this up. Probably got a bit too much pressure on the jaws, just let a little bit off. It's a faff, all this is a faff, but it's worth it. So that's held now. That's looking a little bit gappy again, and that's because the top's overlapped. So we've brought it up, but we know that when that drops back down again, it's going to be pretty much in the correct spot. So just trial fitting it and just making sure that I'm happy with where everything is. So what I'll do now is I'll just release it again, Sharpie round there. I'll cut that round, and then we can go to the next stage. So we'll have that and all the way around there fitted nice and flush. We've only got to address this far end. So first proper trial fit, and it fits pretty well actually. So I'm going to be really fussy and talk through how I could probably improve it slightly, but to be quite honest with you, if I was working to a time scale, this would do. I'd just crack on and weld it now, but I can just show you what I can do to improve things slightly. So let's start at the bottom. So this bottom edge here, this lower joint fits pretty well. Tiny bit gappy on the corner, can do absolutely nothing about that now, so I'm just gonna have to live with that. This is pretty good, so this joint's fine all the way up to here, and on the corner section it's flush. So it meets nice and flush there. The radius is very slightly tighter on the actual panel box than it is on the section that we're letting in, but I can live with that. There's nothing that I can even pick up with my thumb, but once I've welded that and ground it off, it'll be absolutely fine. We can see this corner's just picked up slightly on the edge. So what I can do is just simply bend that down. Because it fits flush on the corner, there's no point making it any lower because then the corner won't meet. Moving to the top section, so we can see that we have got a slight gap there, and then it goes tight. And then we got a very slight gap afterwards. So to draw this gap in slightly, what I need to do is file a tiny little bit by hand off this here, and that's what I'll do next. So I'll just file that, and what that will allow is it'll allow the panel to close up slightly, closing this gap up around here. Again, got a slight gap there, but nothing much. I may find that as this comes around like that, because it's going to come round, it may tighten this up, but I'm not bothered about this because I'm going to cut this off. We'll cut this off and make a new piece of metal that I'm going to let in that will match the contour of the new piece that we're letting in, because obviously it's completely different. Just so I don't lose the position of where I need to take the material off with a file, I'm just going to Sharpie it along there so I know exactly where it is. I'm actually just using an old body file here, filing the outer radius more than the inner. So if the outer radius had been on the repair section, then I could have filed that, but it's far easier to remove it from here than it is a concave shaped, you know, can't get the file in there very well. What you don't want to do is go hell for leather at it. You just want to take it a little bit off and then just keep trial fitting the panel over and over again. And just by holding it up, don't know whether you can see that, but you see that that's pivoting. Yeah? So that would indicate to me that I can still afford to take a little bit more off just there. So I'll take a bit more off. It has tightened it up here, as I suspected it would. Maybe just a tiny little bit more. So I've taken off as much as I feel as I need to along there. I have got a very slight gap still around here, but what's happened is, because I've taken that off there and this is being allowed to come round, the panel is actually grinding out here, stopping me from shutting that up even more. So I'm going to take some material off here. Don't forget we're losing this anyway, so I can't make a mistake by taking too much off. And I think what that will do is that will allow this just to come round that fraction more and just tighten that gap right up so that it's virtually non-existent. And then what I'll do is I'll address this situation with this corner sat up. Like I said, this radius here is tighter on the box than it is on the section that we're letting in. This sits higher here, so I think if I tighten that up, that'll drop that down, and then that'll make that more equal there, so that those two corner sections are exactly the same profile, or closer than they are now. I've got it fitting quite well now. I could improve things, but I think any more improvement would be just needless time spent. Next thing I'm going to do is remove this and make a template. Got a very thin piece of aluminium here, which is perfect to make a template out of. Very easy to cut, of course. I'm just going to grip this into place. So rather than spending all that time rough cutting it out, I can just use the template on all four corners. Of course, I'm not going to cut right up to the line, I'm just going to cut, you know, just inside, but it's a good guide as to where I need to cut it out just to get myself started so that I can get the next corner on. And then all I need to do then is just mirror image that like that, so I can lay that on there like that, and I can just roughly scribe around like that, cut it just slightly larger, cut that one slightly smaller, and then, you know, I'm ahead of the game, aren't I? I'm gonna spend hours working out exactly where to cut it. I thought what I'd do is I'd try and pack as many hints and tips in as I possibly can. Out of the four corners, this is the one that probably fits the least well, so I thought I'd start here because this means I can sort of build in some more sort of hints and tips. So the first thing I'd sort of say is I've had to use these heavier grips. I've got these lighter ones, but unfortunately the lighter ones don't negotiate the depth of the panel, so I've had to use the heavier ones. Because I've used the heavier ones, which isn't such a huge deal, but it's meant that the weight of the grips has distorted the panel slightly. So what I've done to help alleviate the problem is I've put a block of wood under there, and that's helping to support that and keep it more level. So that's the first thing I sort of like to say. So obviously what I've done is I've gripped it up to get the best fit I possibly can, and used as many sets of grips as I can all the way around to try and hold it in the position I want it. The next thing I'm going to do is tack this in all the way around. There are no hard and fast rules on tacking things like spacings between the tacks or whatever, but judging by the amount of mail I get on the subject of people tacking things round saying that, well, the panel was absolutely flush when I tacked it round, Trev, but then when I came to weld it, it obviously moved. This would indicate that you're not putting enough tacks. You can't put enough tacks round if things are going to try and misalign once you start welding. Obviously, the more tacks you have, the less chance there is of things going adrift. So what I've done is I've started off by putting 2 clamps quite close together. I'm going to tack in the middle, so there's absolutely no chance of that moving, or very little chance anyway. They're going to stay pretty well aligned in between these 2 clamps. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So analysing the fit on the panel, on this panel and your own panel, what you need to do is analyse where the gap is the tightest fit. So wherever you've got a real nice tight fit, make sure that's where you're going to put your first tacks. I got a bit of a gap here, so this certainly wouldn't be the first place that I'd start tacking. I'll explain more. What I need to do is get my welding rod. I'm going to hold the welding rod over the joint and I'm going to aim the tungsten at the welding rod. What that will do is that will create the arc to go straight to the welding rod, a little bit of bead off right on the joint, and that little bead of filler material there will then fuse the 2 pieces together. I'm going to just give it enough time so that it just penetrates, and that'll do. It's really a very quick process. It doesn't really matter if it looks horrendous afterwards. It's going to look quite blobby. There'll be bits that we need to grind off before we do our final weld. None of this really matters. What we need to do though is we need to get our tacks to keep the panel nicely aligned. So that's the sort of real goal of what we're trying to achieve here. I'll try and get a tack in around here somewhere next. This needs to be pulled in with a clamp, get that fitting a bit better around there. It's quite gappy here, and I think if I can get this to move over a bit, that'll close that gap up slightly. It's quite tight round here though. I've released all the grips because this corner does seem very tight. And interestingly, you can see that the panel has overlapped here, so it's slightly overlapping because of the shrink that's happened here. So this is heat shrink and this is drawing the panel in, which means this obviously has been amplified because it's having a leverage effect. And I can pull this out, so I can pull that out by hand. There you go, we're back to where we started. So what's kind of happened is it's moved upwards. The whole thing's moved upwards. And imagine if I'd welded it where there's that little gap. So where there's that little gap there, because we had a slight gap in the panel, that would have pulled that gap right up and some more. This would never have fitted afterwards. It would have been, we would have been in a horrendous situation now. So what I'm going to do, because I've only got these 2 tacks here, we've still got some sort of fluid action going on in the panel here. So I'm just going to lift that corner and just put my little mini belt sander around that corner there, just to take that corner off, and that will let that corner sit really nicely in there. Because you see, when I hold it out to get the corners to line up, we've still got a slight gap there. So like I said, mid-course corrections. So I'm just going to put the belt sander over that, and then I'm going to put some tacks along here. You can just see it almost just sits back in there. I'll just show you something else before we move on. People are always saying to me about grinding the little beads down. You know, when should I grind the beads down? Should I always grind them off every time before I planish, or should I planish them first then grind them off? This would be a good example here because we've got quite a bit of a blobby bead here. If I put that dolly under that bead and I give it a bit of a tap with a hammer, what's happened is, because we've got a bead that's sat quite tall, when I've squashed that down, that will have spread that more than if the blob wasn't there. So if that little bead wasn't there, and I just literally hammered on the panel itself, then it wouldn't have as great a spreading effect as it does leaving that there. So again, you know, you got to keep kind of evaluate everything as you're going along. So that has caused that to spread ever so slightly. It just sits in there so nicely now. There's no upwards motion now. The planishing of that little bead there has got rid of that tension that was in the panel. So that now sits, as you can see, I don't have to apply any downward force to this panel to get that to line up. So that's just something else that's a useful little tip. So like I said, I think I'm going to get some tacks in along here, and that will hold that down, or may even just continue along this top. I mean, this is the sort of face that you're going to be looking at all the time, so I suppose it could be a good argument to be had to get this right first before I go around the rest. Okay, so with those two tacks in now, what's happened, what's changed? Like I said, keep evaluating. The thing I can feel most is this corner stuck out. So it's very, very flush here. That is like exactly on the same level. And that is up here as well. But this corner here sticks out a lot. Almost the entire thickness of the panel, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just literally force this round. Beautiful, beautiful and flush. The other thing I've noticed is this little top weld here. We have a situation where the little section is higher than the panel. We're only talking a fraction here though. So again, what we need to do, dolly from behind, and then just give it a bit of a, you can hear making contact. Hear that? That's contact with the dolly underneath. What that will have done is that will have spread the panel out a little bit. We've got our gap back, and then I can simply just tap this down. Yeah, okay. Really nice. In fact, I could probably improve upon that if I just put a little punch up underneath around about there. It just seems to have a slight dip just there. So that's what I'll probably do. So we're on the inside of the panel now. Again, supporting with my dolly from behind, so we're underneath. I'm actually going to go just the other side of the tack, because if I put it on the tack, I'll just be hammering on the tack, won't I? So I'll just put that just under that edge, and I'm going to just give it a little bit of a tap. If I can get the hammer in at this angle. Oh, that's absolutely spot on. I get one on this corner, sort of get this corner tied in so that can't move now. Again, we've got a bit of a discrepancy on the exact height of both panels meeting each other, and what it is, you see, is this actually starts curving away, because this lovely curvy shaped panel isn't dead flat like this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a little bit of pressure on the panel just to bring that down, rather than bending this up, because I want to maintain this lovely shape as much as I can. And if I just give this a bit of a bend, because we got a little bit of a gap here, if I put the TIG on the end, of course, it's just going to melt a huge hole. Not only is it on the edge, but we've also got a bit of a gap. So what I'll do is I'll put a thicker rod in. So I've got a bit of a thicker piece of welding rod. I'll just put that in on a 45 degree, and then I'll heat it up with the TIG welder. That'll form a nice blob, and that blob will just melt lovely into that corner and give us a bit of a heat sink then, because of the actual weld will be acting like a heat sink, and then I'll be able to just use the thinner MIG welding rod down the remainder of that gap. Okay, so this is dead flush, absolutely gorgeous. Of course, what we're doing is we're looking for problems all the time, just trying to identify what's wrong, not what's right. We can live with what's right. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but this panel here, if I just put a bit of weight on it, it lines up better like that, which would indicate to me that this along here needs just folding out slightly. So what I'm going to do is flip it over and just tap along that edge to try and bring this panel up so that it meets this flat section. If I push the flat section down to meet the little piece that we're putting in, then what we'll end up with is a big dip along here, and we don't want too much of a big dip there. So my next tack is going to be here. I'm going to put a tack there. It goes a little bit gappy on the corner, so I'm not going to weld where it's gappy. I'm going to weld where it's a gas tight fit. So that'll be my next tack. Back inside the panel, of course. Just give that edge a bit of a tap up. I really am the wrong way round, but I can't do it without getting in the way of the camera. I'll try and do it from this angle. Just there. Nice one. Absolutely nothing to be concerned about with the fit anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just grip all the way around and just keep continuing on with these tacks, and then we'll start the welding process. I seem to have a bit of a hollow there, not really surprising. This gap's completely closed up along here, so that's just pulled that in and got a bit of a problem there. What I'm going to do is just give it a bit of a tap on the underneath. What feels a bit better. There's certainly enough tacks around there now to hold the panel in position and not sort of have anything rising up unintentionally. So I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get all my sections tacked in, and then I'm going to come back to this and weld it all the way around. I need to make a section that's going to go in here. Well, thanks very much for watching. I really hope you got something out of that. The subject of my next video will be about heat distortion and more specifically the heat shrink effect from welding car bodywork, because it's that thickness of material that really suffers from the heat shrink effect, and it's something I know that specifically plagues a lot of people. I have a lot of questions about this, and I think if you understand the mechanics of creation behind it, then you'll get a greater understanding of how to get past the situation, not let it plague you any longer. So that's going to be the next video, but before I go, I'd just like to say a huge thanks to everybody that's sent me emails over the last couple of months, and I appreciate. I have been away for a rather long time, and that's because, I don't want to go on about it too much, but because I started up a catering business in the middle of a pandemic, so it's been extremely challenging. But I don't want to talk about that really. What I want to talk about is, I want to just say massive thanks. I really appreciate it, guys. I'd just like to say that there were bells on a hill, but I never heard them ringing. No, I never heard them before, till there was you. Bye for now.